You didn't see wrong. The title of the sermon is Not Everything's Gonna Be Alright. I want to start saying that this sermon is kind of special for me. I've been living with this mindset for almost my whole life when I came to church. And one day, I never thought as a sermon. One day I was talking to Bruna, and we were sharing like some problems. I don't remember specifically which problem, if it was our problem or someone else's problem. But then we were just talking and see like a way through that. And Bruna said, everything's going to be all right. And then I replied, or not. And she looked at me with a face that, okay, explain yourself. Tell more. And I start telling her, and this sermon is actually the answer that I gave her. Of course, I don't talk to my wife in a sermon structure, so I put some work to make our conversation a sermon. But this is the idea that when you say that, when I told Bruno that, said, oh, I'm going to preach about the thing we talked like a year ago, and we've been like talking for that, and now every time that someone say, oh, everything's going to be all right, Bruno looked at me and said, or not, you know. But when I said, oh, I'm going to preach that, she said, oh, be careful with the title, you know, because like you're going to discourage people when you say to them that not everything's going to be all right. I said, maybe I should put like change the title or something. But my idea here is not discourage you, okay? Actually, it's completely the opposite. So we can make a shift in the way we think about things, and actually we can have hope that even if the things go to a different direction, we can still have hope. I was 2 weeks ago in the Children's Pastors Conference, and I was with other pastors from our conference. We were about like 15. And they were talking about struggles and problems in the room. And when I'm like in this kind of environment with pastors and people talk, I know that I talk a lot. So I try not to talk at all, unless they ask for my opinion. And that was their mistake. I was walking into the living room and they say, Peter, we're talking about problems and struggles. And say, I mastered this subject. What do you know about problems? And they said, what do you think? And then I shared my vision of life as I've been sharing with you like for 3 years now, that I see my life as a Bible story. So when you see your life as a Bible story, you understand that the crisis is not the end. When you go to the Bible, you see that the Adam's story doesn't end with him behind the bush. Like Joseph's story doesn't end with Joseph in the prison. And I could tell you so much more. But there are some stories that end with a crisis. Stephen, Paul, John, and many others. So when you see our life as a Bible story, we can understand that at the end, God will do something. Bible story usually start with the introduction, showing who is the character in that story. You have probably the main character in this story. You have the characters around. Sometimes you have the villain of the story. And then it comes with a setup, a crisis, and then God intervene in the story. Most of the stories is like that. There are some stories that show us God is setting them free, and there are some stories that you probably don't understand at the end, but there is one that, there are actually two that I think is relevant for our conversation. And it's Daniel's friend. The context, they have, the king built a golden statue and said, you got to worship this statue. And I don't know if you haven't seen the story or the image. Everyone bowed down. There are three guys standing and said, we are not going to worship you. So the king said, throw them in the furnace. And the king is actually engaged in a conversation. He just don't punish them. He's trying to give second, third chance and say, oh, we're going to throw you in the furnace. We're going to kill you. And said, we're fine. And in Daniel chapter 3, verses 17 and 18 is the answer. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. And he will deliver us from your majesty's hands. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship you. They basically say everything's going to be all right. But they also know that there is a chance that not everything's going to be all right. But they just want to make it clear. God can save us. But even if things don't go in the direction that we expect, we still trust in God. If you are one of those persons that got the idea of the sermon quick, I could have finished it here. And if you're like, oh, I just need one takeaway per Sabbath, that's your takeaway, you are excused now to take your nap. That's fine. But I'm not going to finish the sermon here. If you want to take a nap, I will continue for those who are still awake. Okay? So, I want you to think, when was the last time that you were struggling with something? When you had like a big problem. I want you to think about a moment that you were feeling so overwhelmed. Maybe that was a difficult conversation that you had with someone. A challenging situation at work, school, maybe finance, maybe a health problem. And I don't know, but when we face these problems, and we all face that, don't we? Life is not as smooth as we wish that it was. So in this moment, we often hear, or we often say the comforting words, everything is going to be okay. But I don't know, when you are in the mirror of that, when people say that, how you feel. It's really funny because Bruna's father, he's a doctor as well. But he's kind of person that doesn't know how to deal with emotions. And then Bruna one day was sad. And he didn't know what to say. So he came to Bruna and said, oh, don't be too sad. And then we were talking with Bruna and said, oh, okay, now I'm fine. I won't be too sad. Don't be too anxious. Because this kind of things, we don't know what to say and say, oh, everything's going to be all right. But there are some times that that's not the truth. That life is taking you to a path that you didn't want to go. So this phrase tries to bring reassurance that things will be okay, but honest. We know that's not always the truth. I want to talk about having problems in life. And the first thing I want to say to you, it's okay. You don't have to pretend that it doesn't hurt, You don't have to pretend that you are the only one suffering, that you don't have to pretend and think it's okay, and we all have problems. I told you last sermon that I like to read a book of the Bible every year, like deeply. And even though I have to read more books and I try to read as much as I can, there is one specific book that I take to study the year. So I try to listen sermons about that. I try to read books about that. And this year I'm reading the book of Exodus. And one of the things that the people, the Hebrew people, they were in Egypt as slaves. And then God called Moses. That's just a quick summary from this story. And God called Moses and said, oh, there's an interest fact. I told you that I went to Sinai, and that was like a really bad hiking, that my legs were shaking when I was there. And when I was reading, I could see that God speaks to Moses and he said, Moses. And then Moses see the burning bush and start coming close. And God says to Moses, come up here because I want to talk to you. I've done that hike. I would say, God, I can listen from here. You are actually calling me. I'm listening. I don't have to go up there to listen to you. You can just say what you want to say. But Moses is obedient, so he goes up. And then God says, go and free the people. Tell Pharaoh this and this and this. Then you come back to tell me. And said, God, I can't do that. I cannot even talk, Like, it's really difficult for me. And said, no, I'm going to ask Aaron. And I was just trying to imagine this story because, like, Moses now go down. He talked with Aaron. And then God called him and said, oh, let me know. How was your conversation with Aaron? I said, God, you already know. So he has to come up again. And then said, now you go talk to Pharaoh and let me know how this conversation was. And I was just seeing like Moses going back and forth in the mountain. And I was just mad that I had to do that once. And I was almost dying. And Moses had like to walk and go and walk and go and walk and go. And was like, that's just too much. Moses, he was really prepared for that. He was obedient. And he was there to free the people. But then, you could say, if you were Moses, you could get to the Israelites and say, guys, I have a good news. We will not be slaves anymore. Everything's going to be all right. And then, the plagues, everything. They got free. And they were walking into the promised land. Was everything all right? They were angry. They didn't have food. They didn't have water. Opposition, complaint, and they have the doubts about God's plan. They start like saying that, it would be better if you would go back to Egypt because we have food there. We could just die over there. Because they were expecting something right now, a quick fix, just like sometimes we do in our lives. We expect the change. If I change my job right now, everything will be all right. Maybe if I start doing that, everything's going to be all right. Maybe if we had this kind of person in our church, everything would be all right. If I took over this position, the church would be better. I think if the pastor preached about this sermon, the church would be better. And I've heard many things that I should preach. Believe it or not, there are some people that they like to say, like, what kind of subject should I preach or not? If you think about that, just pray. Talk to God, God will talk to me, and we are in agreement. That's just fine. So if you put in the Google Maps from Egypt to Israel, and you know that you can take a bus, you can put a car, you can put walking. That's 142 hours walking. Let's imagine that they walk like 8 hours a day. They had like the fire and the clouds, so they could walk 8 hours. That would be 17 days. They would be free from Egypt, and in 17 days, they would be in the promised land. Do you know how long they took to make this journey? 40 years. 40 years. The only thing that tells me it's that the wilderness, it's not the path to the promised land. The desert, it's not the way into the promised land. The wilderness, the desert, is the path to get closer to God. The problems and all the situation they were facing was not to go to the promised land. They could be there in 17 days. God had a plan to make his people closer to him. Said, we're going to spend enough time that you're going to know who I am. So when we face struggles and problems, first thing, I want you to understand that God did not abandon you. That you were not by yourself in the middle of the storm, in the middle of the problem. God is trying to teach you something. God maybe is trying to teach some people around you, and he's using in your life, or maybe in the future, he's going to use that for a big thing. But as the fire burns the dry leaf, also the fire purifies the gold. So when God is sent or allowing or letting something happen to you or to your life, he's still there. The only thing, he wants to get closer to you. Another thing is that sometimes our problems make us blind. And the second point I want to talk is that God has a bigger plan than you can see. God says, like, my plans are better than yours. My ways are higher than yours. We don't understand. In the 2nd century, there was a woman, a noble woman called Perpetua. And just by the fact that she believed in Jesus, she was persecuted and thrown into the prison. So they knew that she was a noble woman. Her family had some influence. She had kids. And the guards just said, okay, just say that you don't believe in Jesus and we're going to set you free. They actually gave her some privilege to see her father and her child. And her father came with her child and said, just say that you don't believe in Jesus and you're going to be free. Just pretend. And she said, I believe in Jesus. I gave my life to Jesus. And there is her story that she journaled that, but she was showing that even in the middle of the problems, even with death coming, she had peace. Maybe she had in mind what Jesus said. Blessed are those who were persecuted because of their righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The point is that God has a bigger plan. There is a bigger story happening. It's being written. It's bigger than our lives. Our lives are part of this story. But this whole story, the bigger picture that we make part as a puzzle, we are just a little piece of that. So God has bigger plans, and He is writing the story. When you see the Bible and when you step back and you see the bigger picture, you see that even though God is working with His people, there are some people around that God is trying to reach, trying to bless. In the New Testament, you're going to see that God is working with Israel to bless the world. Say, go there and preach the good news. But in the Old Testament, you're going to see that He's saying to Abraham, I will bless those who bless you. Like through you, I will bless the families of the earth. The slavery in Egypt as well, He said, like, I have to give you time, like you're going to be there 400, because I'm waiting for the other people, other nations to repent. And if they don't repent, I will give them 400 years. Then I will set you free. So they were in a slavery because God was having mercy with the other nations. So like, sometimes we don't understand the whole picture. And selfishly we think, God, where are you? What are you doing to my life? And I'm saying, I'm putting myself in that as well. Because how many times I fought with God a no-sense fight, saying, God, what are you doing? The Israelites thought that the key of their happiness would be the promised land. They would think, oh, we are free. If we go to the promised land, everything's going to be solved, a place of rest. But God has something bigger for them. They have in mind that promised land. They think everything's going to be okay. But then guess what? None of them enter in the promised land. Was God's promise failed there? There is a verse, and this is my favorite verse in the Bible. One day I was going through some problems, and even though I used to fight a lot with God, I cried a lot, just God and I cried and I thought, oh God, I just thank Him for being like merciful and long to anger, because if it was in the Old Testament, I would probably be dead by now, just the way I fought with God, or maybe like Jacob. But one day I was reading about God's love, like the verse in Romans 8 that say nothing can separate us from God. And in that moment, the only thing I want to read is that, like, even though I'm going through that, I just needed to know, God, that you are here, that you are by my side, no matter what happened. And then I saw this verse, and that became my favorite verse. Romans 8:18. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. That's just it. I consider that our present fights, our present sufferings, our present troubles cannot be compared with the glory that will be revealed in us. It's just basically saying that all your suffering, all your pain, everything, one day you're going to be in heaven. You're going to look back and you're going to say, it was nothing. It was nothing. So God, I was complaining for nothing because, it was nothing. I'm not saying that your pain, it's irrelevant, that you shouldn't feel. As I said, I cry a lot and I still do, But there are two ways to see your life. You can see your life as the end here and everything that you want finished here. Or you can actually set your eyes in the future and think, no matter what happened here, I'm going to that place. And when I look back, I will see that everything was worthy. That's the only way that Paul could live his life like the way he did. Preaching, going to prison, running away from people who want to kill him, a life of suffering. But because he had his goal, saying like, I'm running this run without looking back because I know where I'm going. And I know when I got there, it will be worth me. So that's bring the idea that everything is going to be all right. It's not about everything being all right, actually. It's about trusting in God, even if we may not see the answers for our problems, for the struggles, for everything that we go through now. Maybe not today. But trusting God, even if things go to a different direction. Max Lucado, he has a story called The Parable of the White Horse. And I heard that so many times, and probably you did as well, but I think it's a perfect illustration for this story. It says that, I'm going to read that. It says that once there was an old man who lived in a tiny village. Although poor, he was envied by all, for he owned a beautiful white horse. And even the king coveted his treasure. A horse like this had never been seen before. So it was a strong horse, a beautiful horse. And people offered him like too much money. Said, can you sell your horse? And he answered, this horse is not a horse to me. Said, it's a person. How could I sell a person? He's a friend, not a possession. How could you sell a friend? And keep in mind that this man was poor, but he never sold his horse. One morning, he found out that the horse was not in his stable. And all the village came to see him and say, you were an old fool, man. We told you that someone would steal your horse. We warned you that you would be robbed, and because you are poor, you cannot defend yourself. How can you protect such a valuable horse? It had been better if you would sell this horse, so now we would have the money, and you could ask how much you wanted. So the old man answered him, don't speak too quickly. Say only that the horse is not in the stable. This is all we know. The rest is judgment. If I have been cursed or not, how can you know? How can you judge? And the people said, like, don't make us out to be fools. We may not be philosophers, but great philosophy is not needed. The simple fact that your horse is gone is a curse. The old man spoke again. All I know is that the stable is empty and the horse is gone. The rest I don't know. Whether it be a curse or a blessing, I can't say. All we can see is a fragment. How can we say what will come next? So the people laughed. They thought the man was crazy. They had always thought he was a fool. If he would have sold the horse and lived off the money. You know, he would have like a lot of money. But instead, he was poor and he didn't want to sell. He was cutting firewood to be alive, to sell. And he was living in misery and poverty. After 15 days, the horse returned. He hadn't been stolen. He had run away into the forest. Not only he had returned, but he had bought a dozen white horses with him. Once again, the village people gathered around to the woodcutter and spoke, old man, you were right, and we were wrong. What we thought was a curse was a blessing. Please forgive us. The man answered, Once again, you are going too far. Say only that the horse is back. State only that a dozen horses return with him. But don't judge. How do you know if this is a blessing or not? You see only a fragment. Unless you know the whole story, how can you judge? You read only one page of the book. Can you judge the whole book? You read only one word of the phrase. Can you understand the entire phrase? Life is so vast, yet you judge all of life with one page or one word. All you have is one fragment. Don't say that this is a blessing. No one knows. I'm content with what I know. So, maybe the old man's right. They said to one another. So they said little, but down deep, they knew he was wrong. They knew it was a blessing. 12 white horses had returned with a little work. The animals could be broken, trained, and sold for much money. The old man had a son, an only son. The young man began to break the white horse to train. And after a few days, he fell from one of the white horse and broke both legs. Once again, the village gathered around the old man and cast their judgments. You were right. You proved that you were right. The dozen horses were not a blessing. They were a curse. Your only son has broken both his legs. And now, in your old age, you have no one to help you. Now you are like even poorer than you was before. The old man spoke again. You people are obsessed with judgment. Don't go too far. Say only that my son broke his legs. Who knows if it's a blessing or a curse? No one knows. We only have a fragment, not the whole story. So it happens that a few weeks later, the country engaged in a war against the neighboring country. All young men of the village were required to join the army. But guess who didn't go? Only the son of the old man was excluded because he was injured. Once again, all the people around came the old man crying and screaming because their son had been taken. There was little chance they would return. The enemy was strong, and the war would be a losing struggle. They would never see their sons again. You were right, old man. And they were crying. God knows you were right. And this proves it. Your son's accident was a blessing. His legs may be broken, but at least he's with you. Our sons are gone forever. The old man said, it's impossible to talk with you. You always draws conclusion. No one knows. Say only this. Your son had go to war, and mine did not. No one knows if it's a blessing or a curse. No one is wise enough to know. Only God knows. This story is amazing because it shows like we don't know the whole story. Maybe you think that the problem, the struggle you are going through is a curse. Maybe you think that the good thing that happened in your life, it's a blessing. But the old man say like, don't draw conclusions. Because we only see a fragment of the whole story. If it's a curse, if it's a blessing, if it's good or not. God is writing the bigger story, and we are just a small part of that. Jesus said to his disciples when he was talking about his departure, and I don't think they got the full picture of what would happen, but Jesus was telling them, things will be a little bit more difficult from now on. And he started telling, I will be crucified. They will get the Son of Man. And Jesus was trying to tell, but I don't think, like by the scriptures, when I read, I know that they didn't get all. They was confused. They were confused and just like, what are he telling? What are he saying? He's the Son of God. How things could not be all right? And I can imagine, like Peter, like the one who talks a lot, saying, everything's going to be all right. And Jesus said in John 16, verse 33, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world. So I want to conclude saying that not everything is going to be right yet, because this is not the end. Life will not always be perfect, and it's not about pretending that the pain will disappear or that all our problems will vanish. Moses did not step into the promised land. He died on the other side looking to the promised land. But remember, it's a Bible story. And Bible stories, when God is writing the Bible story, the end, it's when God says it's the end. Maybe for them, the end was in the mountain, looking to the promised land. He did not enter. But then, God resurrected Moses. God took Moses and took him to the heavenly promised land. He took Moses to heaven. He had expectations that he would enter the promised land on earth. But God has a bigger plan for him. The Israelites did not enter the promised land. The ones who left Egypt. Perpetua, she did not enter the promised land. Not everything was all right for them yet. Because the end, it's when God says it's the end. I know that their story, their Bible story is on hold. And one day, the end will come. And in that day, I know that heavenly place, it's been waiting for them. They all has a place over there waiting for them. 2 Corinthians 4, Paul reminds us, for our light and momentary troubles that we are going through here are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. I don't know what you're going through, but I want you to set your eyes to the end, not to your end, not to your friends, not to your parents, but to God's end. To God's end. That end that will have no more pain, no more suffering, and we all will be together. It's okay to have problems now. Life is full of them. But remind Jesus' words. I'm telling you that so you may have peace. You will have trouble in this world, but take heart. I overcome the world. So this verse tells that we can face everything, we can go through everything with peace. And he said that this peace, sometimes we don't understand. Sometimes we got peace that makes no sense. But I just want to remind you that at the end, He will finish your story in His ways. So not everything is going to be all right in this life yet. Because one day, when we see like the end of the bigger picture, we all will be in heaven. And we're going to look back and say, God, it was worthy. Everything was worthy. I would go through that like again and again and again. when I look back, said that was nothing. That was slight comparing to all the glory that is waiting for us. Jesus is coming back. And I believe that it's really, really close. You can see how things are going out there. Fire, winter, climate change, wars. Like when you turn the TV on, it sounds that you were reading Matthew 24. Jesus is coming back. So just hold on a little bit more. Just a little bit more. And the end of the story, it will come for you and me. May God bless you and take care of you. And just hold a little bit more to the end of your story. Jesus bless you.